First topic for the day. I'm gonna open it up. Zach, we're gonna go through maybe the more bearish part of the discussion today, which was the Samurai Wallet sentencing. We got the max sort of sentence that was possible under their plea deal. But yeah, walk us through the details there, and maybe provide some context for folks who think that there's sort of a major update here, because it sounds like that might not actually be the case.
Yeah, so we're recording the day after Keonne Rodriguez, one of the two defendants in the Samurai Wallet case, was sentenced to the statutory maximum, meaning the highest amount of time allowed by law for the crime that both the defendants pled guilty to, which is conspiracy to engage in unlicensed money transmission. It's unfortunate. I think it's unjust. I think both the defendants are not actually technically guilty of the crime to which they have pled guilty, but this sentence is not unexpected. I think it was more or less inevitable. What happened in this case is the defendants were charged with two crimes. One was a money laundering offense, which is a more serious crime. It doesn't really have to do with any particular technology. It's you did something to help criminals launder funds. And that had up to a 20-year in prison sentence, but would have required the government to prove at trial the sort of specific intent that was in the defendants' minds, that they intentionally helped criminals. And then there's this lesser charge, the money transmission charge, that merely requires that they knew that criminals were using the tool they put out. Now, from a legal perspective, the name of the charge they pled guilty to is pretty Orwellian in two respects. The first is because of the word unlicensed. The theory that the government ultimately charged and they pled guilty to had nothing to do with licenses. The government basically retracted their earlier theory that the defendants were sort of money transmitters under the Bank Secrecy Act or under FinCEN's regulations. In fact, we learned during this case that the government went to FinCEN and asked, do we think that these guys were money transmitters? And FinCEN said no. And instead, the type of unlicensed money transmission that they were charged with doesn't require anything to do with a license. It's just they knowingly transmitted funds that were from criminals. And the other Orwellian part is around the word transmission. The defendants here, if you understand the technology that they built, which is a non-custodial coin join, they didn't transmit anything. Their users were the ones transmitting funds. And when you plead guilty to a crime, you have to do what's called an allocution, where you say in your own words the conduct that you did that makes you guilty of a crime. And both Keonne and Bill were very careful to accurately describe the way Samurai Wallet worked, which was a bit awkward because it didn't transmit anyone's funds. It was software that helped users find each other to engage in collaborative transactions, where users would send funds from one address they controlled to another address they controlled. And there is no in between. It's just a normal Bitcoin transaction, but designed to sort of add privacy to Bitcoin or to UTXOs that these users held. So they're going to spend, at least Keonne, but there's reason to think that it's probably going to be similar with Bill. So spend 5 years in prison for unlicensed money transmission, where he neither needed a license nor transmitted funds. And so, that sucks. There's no way around it.
Yeah, I want to double tap a little bit on a comment that I guess you probably made to me earlier today, which is that this is more of a reflection of like Judge Coate and her, sort of predispositions and general sort of sentencing standards, that it sounds like she's, just an exceptionally harsh sentencer, and we shouldn't actually read into this beyond that itself. Because I think there is a tendency for folks to say, oh, well, they got, the maximum sentence. This was, this might be some indication that the, Department of Justice as a whole, or the courts as a whole, are still like really unfavorable to this issue. That might still be the case, but again, I think there might be some evidence that this is not maybe the proper reading in this scenario.
Yeah, I don't really think it is. If I were to speculate about the motives of everyone involved here, why did the Department of Justice bring this case in the first place? I think that they see money laundering using crypto as a real problem. And it is, a real problem to some extent. They saw that criminals do sometimes use tools like coin joins to hide their funds, or other non-custodial privacy tools like Tornado Cash. They know that it is very hard to prove specific intent, that someone intended to help criminals launder funds when they're building crypto infrastructure. And so they're sort of using this particular offense as money laundering light. It's kind of like, the government going after Al Capone for tax evasion rather than sort of the other mafia stuff. And it's easier to get convictions. And the government, at least the Biden administration, when they brought this case, didn't care about the collateral damage to the crypto industry that these cases would set when you bring them against non-custodial developers. But I don't know that it was intentionally like, an attack on crypto. And then Judge Cote is famously a pro-government, pro-prosecution, very tough judge and sentencer. That is, I think, is a big part of what motivated the defense to plead guilty, because having to have a trial in front of Judge Cote with an unknown jury where you could face 20 years in prison is just a real gamble. And she had sort of summarily denied all of their legal arguments and basically waved off the sort of shocking evidence that they uncovered, that the DOJ sort of ignored FinCEN's guidance that the defense weren't guilty of the crime they pled guilty to. And so I think this was really just a calculation on their part, avoiding the downside of decades in prison. And then Judge Cote, I don't think, just based on her statements, really cares so much about the difference between the money transmission and the money laundering charge. In fact, at Keonne's guilty plea, she confused them and read the elements of the wrong charge and had to be corrected by Keonne's lawyer on that point. But I think that is really evidence that, like, the mental state here is money laundering equals bad. And, even though sort of conspiracy and money laundering are hard things to prove, this is a way that you can punish, what the government views as money launderers. I don't think that's a statement so much about the judiciary as a whole. I mean, we'll see. Coin Center has an important case, Llewellyn versus Garland, going on right now. I think it's now Llewellyn versus Bondi, technically, because you sue the attorney general. But we'll see if other judges will react differently. And then, of course, the sort of more permanent way to make sure that this doesn't happen again is to pass the Clarity Act and the developer protections there.
Any comments from the peanut gallery here, Ken or Stephen?
Yeah. I mean, Zack lays it out as well as anyone, that is talking about this. So it's, there's not a ton more to add, except, I guess, more outrage on my part, just that the sooner that we can sort of set some parameters to help, I think the charitable way to say, guide judges in these types of situations, and to kind of, I guess, hem them in a bit, keep them on the reservation, the better. It's a ridiculous miscarriage of justice, in my opinion. And, it's a tragedy. I hate to see it unfold. It's a hard week, I think, for everyone, especially for guys that are going to be spending many years in prison.
Yeah, Zach. I mean, I think we're looking at these are the last gasps of where we were, and as opposed to where we're going. Unfortunately, these two guys have to bear the brunt of those last gasps, but it's the last gasps. I mean, I think there were expectations that the new administration would undo everything that the Biden administration did against the industry. They undid a lot of it, but I think it was maybe a little optimistic to hope that they would undo everything that the Biden administration has started. But I think that's the key point, and Zack said it. I think this underscores the point of why it's important to actually pass legislation that establishes foundational law about what is decentralized, what is not, for example, or what is money transmission, what is not. I think it's important. I mean, since Trump took office, he disbanded the DOJ unit that investigated cryptocurrency. I think you'll always have law enforcement agents jurisdiction shop trying to find the right place where they think that their best chance of prosecution is going to happen. I probably no coincidence that they ended up in front of this judge for this case. And again, it's unfortunate. I mean, there's a human cost to this. These two guys who have to go to one certainly and probably, or two are going to go to prison over this. But the way I look at it, this is sort of the last faint echoes of the past, underscoring why we have to do what we're working on at PPI, passing Clarity, passing the BRCA. But I don't know that it indicates anything other than that. It's just a reminder where we are and why it's important not to take this time for granted, and get working on important stuff.
I have a question for Zack Shapiro. something that I don't know if we've discussed before, but you know, the community, Bitcoin community, others raised a pretty big stink about this, and this has been, at least from my perspective, a fairly uh, well publicized case from the beginning all the way through sentencing. But that's our perspective, right? We're living, breathing, Bitcoin industry all day, every day, peer to peer, open source developers. Um, it- you know, did we did we really raise, like, is this sort of a unique level of stink that we raised, or is it did it not sort of reach the ears of those in power like we think it did? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think the answer to that is complicated. For us, we did raise a pretty big stink. I think it did reach the ears of at least some people in power. I know because I saw that happen. Um, I think, some of what the administration did, I think the Blanche memo is in response to our concerns. I think the government dropping the allegation that the non-custodial tools in Tornado Cash and Samurai Wallet needed to be licensed by FinCEN is important, and honestly, like, not to minimize what's happening to the individual defendants, but a huge sort of policy win that we're not setting the precedent that judges have ruled or people have pled guilty to, needing a license with FinCEN and not getting it. So I don't want to lose sight of that. But this is a pretty niche issue, even as far as crypto issues go, right? I mean, it's like everyone has heard of the our token securities or commodities issue. Everyone heard of the sort of Binance prosecution, and this is definitely a little bit more in the weeds. And so, I would call this a partial success, but um, there's both difficult politics around the government intervening in federal criminal prosecutions and sort of hot button issues around money laundering and criminals in the case of Tornado Cash, North Korea, and it just wasn't enough to stop the cases cold in their tracks.
Yeah, when you're in the middle of something, it's hard to be objective, and so I was just kind of curious what your perspective was on that. I have, mine, which seems like everyone did, sort of valiantly went to bat here, and but we're still, we're a small industry and growing. But Ken, yeah, I
Small
agree
but
with
mighty.
your
Small
bullish
but mighty.
take. I agree with your bullish take. I think we're at the kind of tail end of some of this, but I hate it that these guys had to kind of, somebody has to be kind of the last ones, and I hated that it was them. It's brutal.
I'm also curious if we should, I know there was a little bit of a Twitter rumble that, the folks who were behind the Ross Ulbricht pardoning might put some resources towards this. I wonder if that's kind of something worth rallying our efforts around, what the feasibility of that is. Yeah, just kind of throwing that out there.
Without going into a lot of yes, it is something that's feasible, and we should put a lot of effort into. And if it's going to happen, it's going to happen soon. And so definitely, we should make noise for this, and we may at some point be back out there fundraising to help these folks get a pardon attorney.
Well, you heard it here first, folks.
Bravo.